JLF's Brave New World welcomes you back to our second session of the day. Those of you who missed our earlier session, The Governance of the Unprepared, with Professor Homi K. Bhabha and all our other sessions featuring Meera Nair, Peter Frankopan, Margaret Atwood, Oran Pamuk, you can catch these on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, or on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Our official radio partner is Red FM Bajate Raho. Our next session today is an orchestra of minorities. Chigozie Obioma in conversation with Aruni Kashyap. Chigozie Obioma, the Nigerian writer described as the heir to Chinua Achebe, is the author of an orchestra of minorities. Told from the perspective of the protagonist, Chinonso's 700-year-old chi, or spirit in the Igbo tradition, the novel speaks of the mythologies as well as the realities of love. In conversation with writer and academic Aruni Kashyap, Obioma speaks of his books, telling us why he writes and for whom. Chigozie Obioma was born in Akure, Nigeria, and is described as the heir to Chinua Achebe. He is the author of The Fisherman and an Orchestra of Minorities, which were both shortlisted for the Booker Prize and have been translated into more than 30 languages. Aruni Kashyap is the writer and translator. He's the author of his father's disease and other stories. Noikon Etia Duroit and The House with 1,000 Stories. His poetry collection, There Is No Good Time for Bad News, was a finalist for the 2018 Marsh Hawk Press Poetry Prize and 2018 four-way book Levi's Award in Poetry. He's an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Georgia, Athens. Please do remember to comment and ask questions by typing it into the comment section. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And in case we drop off, please hang in there and we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, an orchestra of minorities, Chigozie Obioma in conversation with Aruni Kashyap.
Thank you, Sanjay. Chigozie, what a pleasure to meet you again like this. And it's been almost 2 years since we met, right? Isn't it?
Is it? I don't know. I have a mental fog these days. I thought it was last year.
Last year, yeah, I think it was last year, September in Boulder, Colorado, when the Jaipur Literature Festival happened. I'm just going to dive right in, and I'm glad to see you. And I'm really a big admirer of your work. Both of these novels are wonderful novels, but we are going to focus our discussion today on an orchestra of minorities, which is shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I'm going to start by talking about the person's chi. I mean, I know what a chi is, but I think your readers would love to know where do you get to meet chi, and where is chi from, and what kind of role chi actually has in the Igbo cosmology. Could you please talk a little bit about, because the book is narrated from the person's chi, right? Yeah.
Yes. Well, again, thank you to JLF for inviting me. It's a pleasure, really. Well, I do want to go to Jaipur anyway someday, actually visit the place. So I hope that will happen. And Aruni, it's a pleasure to speak with you again. Actually, we spoke 2 years ago. You're right. It was in 2018. Yeah.
Right.
And we're again now. So to understand the chi, I think we have to first place it in context of the wider cosmologies of the world, especially India, for instance. You have like major cosmologies. If you look at the Buddhist tradition, for instance, there's like pantheons that are very interesting. So it is in a way what undergirds the worldview of a particular group of people. And herein, the Igbo people of West Africa, which is where I come from, have this idea, this belief that no human being exists by themselves. So we are kind of a tripartite being, which means that there is like a 3-dimension to every individual, almost like the Christian worldview, where you have the idea of the body, soul, and the spirit. So one of the parts of what makes up a human being is their chi, which is a kind of a subordinate spirit that inhabits you before you were born, and then goes on to remain with you throughout your lifetime. So when I wanted to tell this story, in this particular novel, I thought of the best ways to actually realize the what is the the grandiosity of the story, which spans like a decade, in fact, more than a decade. What would be the best way to tell that story? Because it's a story of somebody's rise and fall, Chinonso's rise and fall. And I decided that it would be best to tell it through the point of view of that chi, that spirit, because it will, not only would it allow me to chronicle his life even before he was born, but every minutiae of it up till the very present, when he's like in his 30s.
Okay. The chi sounds very much like the soul, which comes into the earth to experience a very physical experience, and when the body dies, it kind of assumes another body. Am I right, or am I just making it more confusing?
Yeah, it is in many ways that like that. So it stays. So the scholars are kind of divided on the positionality of the chi, but I after my research decided that I'm of the school with Achebe and others that the chi actually ensouls you. So there are some Igbo scholars who believe that the chi is like a shadow that walks with you. But if it does ensoul you, it makes more sense because the chi tries to interfere sometimes in your thinking process, which we see culminate throughout the novel. So, but the chi is itself a deity. So it doesn't only exist with a particular person, it reincarnates. So this chi, as Sanjay said earlier, has actually lived for some 7 centuries or thereabout. So it's been coming and going. At a particular time, the chi recollects how it ensouled a character who went to America, in the 19th century, very early 19th century as a slave, was, the transatlantic slave ship. So that's who the chi is. So it has ensouled some of the ancestors of the character. So it's a spirit that does not die, as you said, just like the soul of an individual, but it is different from that in that generally it exists within a clan, a kind of ancestry clan, a blood lineage. So it encircles, people who are born into a particular family.
Right. It seems to me it is very much different from what we understand as the soul in India or the Atma in India, is in the sense that you just said that it is also a deity which protects you and guides you sometimes.
Right.
So that, I think, is the difference between the cosmology that I have experienced in India. But of course, there's so many different, very varied folklore as well about souls. So coming to the next question, I also wanted to talk about the very different part, the very curious immigrant journey that your character takes in a novel. This isn't the journey that we generally see in fiction and film, that because most of the time people come to the US or UK or the European countries, they face racism, they face culture clash, and eventually they survive. Eventually, most of them make a home. They live their dream of the immigrant, the American dream, or other kinds of dreams of settling in a more developed, more stable economy and culture and society. Most of the time, these immigrant narratives, especially I think the Indian English immigrant narratives, are very affirming, self-affirming.
Right.
But your immigrant journey, as well as your character's immigrant journey, is very, very different. So I was just wondering if you would like to talk about about this different kind of immigrant journey that is not through the glitzy airports of Chicago, New York, and Heathrow, but through a very different country, you know, in the margins of Europe. I think that really makes your book so also very, very exceptional, because it is just by its very content, you know, it is a very different kind of immigrant journey that we are seeing.
Well, in general, I am very interested in people who live on the margins and societies who are on the margins. This is not just platitudes, but it's really true. If you look at my first novel, for instance, the Fisherman, is set in Akure. It's a city that nobody has heard of. Most urban Nigerian novels are set in Lagos, you know, most of the time. I mean, because it's a city where things happen, or Port Harcourt, or something like that. But this novel, especially, came from an actual events. That's what inspired it. The gem of the idea comes from that. So I was in many ways true to some of the elements of, you know, the real, the lived experience that inspired the story. So, which means that I myself lived in Cyprus. So the trajectory of my travel, as you just said, was unusual, because the the destination where Nigerians go for higher education, if they leave the country, is usually the UK mostly, or the US or Australia. I mean, English-speaking countries. So it kind of makes sense. But Cyprus, what is Cyprus? I mean, in fact, nobody in my family had heard of it, of the place, when I decided to go there. But it was circumstances that took me there, as well as the Jay, who is the guy whose situation inspired the story. He came to Cyprus, and because he just wanted to get out of Nigeria and go to a country with an easy access and a quick visa. As you know, coming to America is pretty difficult for most people. So long story short, he landed in Cyprus and then discovered upon coming that he had been deceived. That in fact, Cyprus was not a European country, and I mean Turkish side of Cyprus, not the republic itself, because there are two Cypruses. So he found out that this was actually almost a third world country, and he was devastated by that. So so that journey itself is kind of what inspired the story. So the unusual, as you said, immigrant experience.
Absolutely, and it was a very tragic story. If you would like to very quickly talk about it. It was one of your friends who, or somebody you knew there who died there.
Yes.
Is it right? Yeah, because that inspired the story.
Yeah. So the story was inspired by this guy named Jay, who, as I said, was deceived, came to Cyprus, discovers that he has been deceived, and then he drinks very heavily, somehow finds himself at the attic of this 4-story building. And I think that he was trying to walk back his steps, but he walked over the building and then landed to his death. So we found him days later, because of the smell of his body, because he fell through the crack between the elevator, down. So he was lost for a few days. That we were looking for him. The police was looking for him. So in the aftermath of that tragic event, I remembered something floated up the way it happens in the aftermath. Just an information, something he had said in the passing, that, look, Chigozie, I made this journey because I was in love with this woman and I wanted to make money as quick as possible, and so that I can come back and marry her. So I started to think that what could have made this guy take this leap? And then this novel is a way for me to retrace that step, his journey. So this novel is about Chinonso, who is a poultry farmer, who falls in love with this woman named Ndali, whom he finds trying to jump a bridge to her death, and then rescues her. And after that, they fall in love. But then they both discover that they are worlds apart, because Ndali is from this bourgeois family, and she's highly educated. She's going to be a doctor, while he's just a poultry farmer. So in the attempt to be able to win her family's hand, Chinonso makes a journey, and that is the novel. So the novel charts what happens to their relationship in the aftermath of this journey.
And it is very reminiscent of the journey of Oedipus. In journey in Odyssey. And did you consciously borrow from the epic, or were you inspired? Did you read the epic to construct this novel? Because you also talk about how so many hurdles are placed in front of his journeys in the epic, and how so many hurdles are placed in front of Chinonso when he wants to come back and meet Andali, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is what happens in writing. So you read all of these things, and a consciousness forms.
Mm-hmm.
You can call it arbitrary or a firmly rooted consciousness, but that consciousness is an approximation of all these things that you have read. So, after I wrote The Fisherman, one of my first readers wrote to me and said, "My goodness, do you know that this is the Cain and Abel story?" And it never crossed my mind while I was writing the novel itself, even though in the novel there's a mention of Cain and Abel, but I wasn't thinking about it in that sense. So people have said that this is like the Odyssey, but it wasn't a conscious kind of a parallel construction. But I do see that. I see elements of that in the journey, because the Chi at some point makes a reference to the journey of Odyssey, only to encourage Chinonso in his journey, saying, "Look, this guy comes back and still meets his lover, Penelope, intact." But in many ways, the Odyssey is used as a myth to create this mythology of love, which in many ways, destroys Chinonso. If that's not a spoiler, because then for a long time one can say that the reality of love sustained him. The fact that he knows that Ndali loves him, but the mythology of love that Ndali is going to be, that is Penelope, is what leads him, to the end of the novel.
I want to come back to the immigrant story in a bit, but when you were talking about it, I found myself thinking about my father. My father is also a writer, but he's a non-fiction writer, and he is a very, very brutal literary critic. And when I was growing up, I used to always say, I don't have any plots, I have no experience. What am I going to write about? And you know what he used to always tell me? He said, from the days of the Mahabharata, by which he means from time immemorial.
Mm-hmm.
Mahabharata is the Indian epic, the largest Indian epic.
Yeah, I have a copy here.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it's so good, the story-wise, actually. So he used to say, from the days of the Mahabharata, human nature has not changed. People want something and there are impediments, and that's the story. And I find myself teaching that every day to my undergraduate and postgraduates, create a character, make your character want something, and create impediments. And that's the story, because only trouble before you meet your desire is interesting in fiction, isn't it?
Yeah. No, absolutely. You're right. That is how an arc is formed. A few years ago, I was in a place called Aspen in Colorado. Actually, we were in Colorado. And somebody said to me, so I went on these, this thing, I've forgotten what it's called, but this stuff that moves around the track, and then the gondola.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so you can see a view, a kind of a panoptic view of a place through it. And I was told that just a few days prior, somebody had fallen from that almost to their death, but they were rescued by a guy who just happened to be there, who is like a daredevil guy. He walks on tight ropes and all kinds of things. And she asked me, that is a very interesting thing, but does it make a story? And for a long time, I thought about it, man, can that be a story? And it so happened that at the end of my reflection, I came to the understanding that no, that's not a story, as interesting as it sounds, simply because the guy who was on that tightrope, on that gondola, did not have any kind of desire necessarily to achieve anything. He was just there to entertain himself. And it is by coincidence that the other guy, if he is to be the protagonist, the daredevil guy who actually does something, who saves him, was not there to save anyone. It just so happened that he was there and saved him. So that cannot be a story. But if you were to make that into a story, it would be that the daredevil guy was trying to achieve something and then saves this man. Then that is a story. So desire is really the vehicle of storytelling.
I wish you could come to my class and tell this to my undergraduate at a certain point. I said that I wanted to go back to the immigrant narrative a little bit, and I don't want to sort of categorize your novel as one of those immigrant novels, and I want to actually talk about how special it is, because I think your novel also highlights how there is also a variety of class among immigrants. I think that's the question I forgot to answer because we kind of rolled over. So if I was wondering if you wanted to comment on that, because so many immigrants come to the US, to the UK, but we forget that all these immigrants are coming with different kinds of privileges. People who grew up in urban setting, like you say, Lagos, or even like Delhi or Bombay in India,
Right.
They have a certain kind of training to be able to even apply for a scholarship for undergraduate education. People coming from small places, such as me, I didn't know until I graduated that actually people got scholarships by applying. I just thought that you're brilliant and you did very well, and somebody heard your name in the US or UK and they gave you a scholarship. That was exactly my point of view. So did you consciously think of bringing this class element to the immigrant narrative as well?
Yes, absolutely. Because as you said, so a few years ago, a friend of mine, Taye Selassie, coined the word Afropolitan, which many people have kind of argued with. But that speaks to a specific kind of, immigrants, really. And most of us have been enriched. Our lives have been made better by coming to America, really. I have a friend who within 3 years of coming to the US, he went from not having any money, like as in he did not have anything. He was brilliant guy, but he was just like living from like hand to mouth, so to speak. He went from that in Nigeria. He went from that to having a house, a car, and a well-paid job within 3 years of coming to America. That was like something he would never have imagined in his wildest dream. So, but there are other people, as you said, who get on boats through the Mediterranean Sea and go to Greece or find themselves in Libya. So their immigrant experience is not the same as this, my friend, So that's something that we don't really see very much in literature. But I know that they're out there, but I wanted to bring that to page because I lived that experience. So Turkish Cyprus was a very interesting experience for me as a person. So in the novel, there's a scene that I still think about where Chinonso he's walking, across the city, and he arrives at this place where he becomes mobbed by this group of kids. They've never seen a black person before. They've only seen them on TV, but they've never. So I myself experienced something similar. In fact, I was in a place and this small kid, Turkish kid, came to me in Turkey and said, "Why are you like this?" I was like, "What do you mean? Why am I like this?" And he was like, I said, "This is how I am. I mean, I was created this way." And he couldn't believe it. So after a while, he says, "Oh, I found the reason why this guy is like this. He ate a lot of chocolate, and then he came on his skin." So I mean, he was like a 5-year-old boy or something. So he was just thinking, to try to understand. So those are the kind of like places that some of us end up in, where like you don't even have any precedent or precursors who have been there before. So this, I think, also should be part of, should be integrated into the greater, immigrant story.
Yeah, and I think one of the greatest African writers, Nuruddin Farah, actually studied in India, and I don't know if he's written about his experience in India, but the contemporary Indian experience in India for Black Africans is really horrible. So I feel
No, it's not good. Yeah,
it's really, really bad. There's been all kinds of violent situations, and similar to the situations that you just mentioned. A lot of people I know actually have faced. I want to go back to teaching a little bit because this is what both of us do, and we teach English, we teach creative writing. And you mentioned in your teaching statement that you often tell your students to read 100 books before writing one book. So I was wondering if you would like to name a few books that really has shaped your life as a writer. And I'm sure Chinua Achebe is one. But apart from Chinua Achebe, would you like to recommend a few writers, that people can probably read and know that these writers have shaped your aesthetics and an idea of what a good story should be?
Well, I don't always, because what shapes my aesthetics honestly is amorphous. If I'm to put everything together, I can't really say, but I would say that the books that I think of, that I return to sometimes, just to apprise myself with what I think great fiction is, consist of a diverse list, but most of them I read in my formative years. That would include most of Shakespeare's works. I think Shakespeare's oeuvre is very prominent in my consciousness when I think of great works of literature. But in contemporary times, I really admire The God of Small Things, for instance, Roy's book, who actually a few years ago was going to go to Nigeria with me to sensitize Nigerians that they should stop coming to India. She wanted to do that because of that stuff. So I like reading. I loved that book, but there are a lot of people. Yukio Mishima, I think he's somebody who we don't really read very much, but he was a great Japanese writer. I admire Kazuo Ishiguro, Vladimir Nabokov, Cormac McCarthy. I think that Blood Meridian is a great novel. It's one of the greatest books I've ever read. But also, I admire some of the early plays of Wole Soyinka, the Nigerian writer, who won the Nobel Prize. But also Virginia Woolf. I mean, you can't talk about great fiction of the 20th century without talking about the breadth and power of The Waves and To the Lighthouse. So these are the books that I return to. I also obviously love the works of Melville. I mean, people talk about Moby Dick, but Melville's poetry is amazing and something that I go back to very often.
Thank you. We have 4 minutes, and I wanted to ask you a quick question. That will be the last question from me. I recently met a scholar on African literature who will be not named, who said that the current African novel is written in America and the UK. And I found myself being very defensive about it, but I couldn't really give many examples. But I do know that there's a lot of there are many Nigerian writers, many African writers who write and publish only in Africa. And they are not published in the wider markets of the Northern Hemisphere for various reasons. Not at all because of the quality of their work, but because of various other reasons. So I was wondering if you read, if you could recommend or read, or do you read any Nigerian writing that is published only in Nigeria, but it is not available for a wider audience that we would like to pick up. I think there are many good presses such as the Kasaba Republic who does a lot of good work, but I think we don't know if you're only following English newspapers published in the West.
Well, the truth is that this is the same for every culture. There's some writing that will not leave a particular country. Achebe tried to make a categorization a few years ago when he called some literary works national literature. I don't know if I agree with that, but in America, for instance, there are some writers who are not read outside the shores of America, but they are very big here. Nobody has heard of them, even in Canada. So I don't think it's unique to Nigeria, and there are a lot of things that result in that. But that being said, there are some people who should receive wider readership but haven't, whom I know in Nigeria. There is a novel by my friend Onyeka Onwelue is his name. He actually published his novel in Nigeria, but also in India. Actually, it's called The Abyssinian Boy.
Also a friend, by the way. I have known him for many years. Yeah.
Okay, so a guy like that has not received wider readership, but I think he's a talented writer.
Yeah.
But I can't think of others really, because I think that there's a lot of interest in African literature, especially in the aftermath of Black Lives Matter. Everybody wants to publish the Black stuff. So I feel like most of the work, I think, have been published in the West. Really, think so.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to know that we have a common friend, and actually Onyeka has a lot of India connection as well because he lived in India for a while. Yeah, so thank you for this recommendation. We have 1 minute, so I'm not going to ask you any more questions. There is a question from Sakshi Tyagi. She asks, is Ogbanje, the evil spirit, also a type of chi?
No, it's a different kind of entity in the Igbo imagination. So the Ogbanje, which a version of which Ben Okri explored in The Famished Road, which won the Booker Prize a few years ago in 1990, I think, is a spirit that is believed to ensoul children, a particular kind of children. So there are some who are believed to be stillborns. So they come and then they die almost immediately. And then they are born again and they keep coming. So that's what Ogbanje is.
There's a very interesting question from Rachita. She asks, is it easier to transfer the blame of an event to the spiritual realm rather than humans accepting the responsibilities of their follies? I think this is a very interesting question because...
well, the chi is not, I don't think that people blame the chi necessarily or the spirit for their actions. In fact, what first inspired my interest in the chi is obviously my name, Chigozie, Chinoa, Chinelo. Many Igbo names are like an evocation to the chi. And one day I just asked my mom long ago, why is all these names with chi? What is the chi? And she told me, and in her speeches, she would always say, okay, well, when something happened that is bad, that is beyond somebody's control, well, this is as a result of the weakness of his chi, something like that. So what people do believe that, yes, to some extent, your chi should be strong for you to succeed. But they also believe in the personal agency of the individual. So in Achebe's Things Fall Apart, for instance, it is said that Okonkwo's chi may have been weak, but by his hard work, he excelled. He became the strong man of the community. So, which is to say that even if your chi is weak, you can still, push your own limit and open your own doors.
Right, thank you. I have a friend from one of my favorite people in Indian letters, Namita Gokhale. She's also the festival director, author, of course. And she asked, tell us more about your deep engagement with Shakespeare. And I think I would also like to know this answer to this.
Well, so Shakespeare, I don't know for what reason, but I read him as, so his work was like what was in my parents' library. They had this small shelf of books, and for some reason they had all of this Macbeth and all of these books, so as you like it. I remember that book. We used to even sing about it, as you like it, at the time. So I read him a lot, and I think that the arc of a story, what happens, how a character moves from one place to the other, just became ingrained somewhere. That structure in me. And I for instance, many people say that the prophecy of the madman closely resembles that of the witch's prophecies in Macbeth, but this is again unconscious. So I think what Shakespeare has done for me is that I find myself applying Shakespearean structures to localizing it to the Nigerian context. So wherein in Nigeria we have mad people just like, or people who are said to be mad walking about the street, I then bring them and make them into, what seems like a Shakespearean character. So I think what I can say that he has contributed to me is that I have, in some ways, internalized the structures of his work, especially the tragedies, which is why, some people have written these, things about my scholarship, about my novels, calling them tragedies, even though I don't use that term myself. But, I think it does make sense.
We have a question from an audience called Bijay. Bijay asks, is the Igbo chi similar to the Hindu concept of karma, which precedes the individual?
In some ways, yes. Actually, I had that conversation sometime last year. I think they're very similar. I must say that I haven't done too much research into karma, but I think there's a similarity because of the precedent. So there's a chapter in this novel, which even though I know that all of you are going to rush out, you are going to break the lockdown rules and go and buy copies of my novel. But, even if you won't, there's a chapter in this novel that I think you should read. It all happens in the cosmological space. So the chi ascends to the hills of the ancestors and meets with the ancestors of Chinonso. So in that part of the novel, you understand the chi better. So the chi narrates how the process of a human being's formation in the Igbo imagination, and how the chi ensouls a person before they are born. I think it's a very interesting chapter, really, and that would explain almost everything you need to know about the chi.
This is a question again from Sachadev Ramakrishna. This is a question about process. So I really like the question. While you write your wonderful books, do you distance yourself from reading anything and getting distracted, or do you still indulge? I know some authors don't read anything when they're writing their first drafts. I'm very omnivorous. I keep reading, but I would love to.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Sometimes I think of it as a kind of superstition. There is the fear, I have to say, that if you're reading something that is similar to the thematics of what you're working on, then you might find yourself leeching up that stuff. So I am of that class. I'm sorry, Aruni, to say that I have a conscious fear of reading, or anxiety maybe of
Yeah.
reading what is written around the same topic while I'm writing. Uh, but sometimes I do. For instance, the novel I'm working on right now, I'm reading something similar, to it, and I'm like, well, should I stop? But the book is so great that I keep going. you know, yeah.
You want to talk about the novel that you are working on right now, or do you don't want to talk about it? I'm very interested.
Uh, well, I'll just say that it's probably the novel I have been thinking I would write, for since I started writing. It's about a very interesting part of Nigerian history, but I don't want to say what exactly it's about now because my publishers has asked me not to. So, but
Okay,
people are going to hear about it within the next year or two. Yeah.
that's wonderful. We have 5 minutes, so I'm just going to ask a question. How has been being on quarantine for you? Are you able to work? Are you able to write? I found myself not being able to write at all initially. Now I'm reading a lot, but I'm not writing any fiction. I'm writing non-fiction for instance. So how has it been for you, creatively? Are you able to sort of write regularly, be productive? What's going on?
So may I ask you, what kind of nonfiction are you writing? Are they about the lockdown and all that?
No, no. Memoir, personal stories.
Oh, okay.
I'm also writing about books. I really like writing about books, but I don't like writing book reviews. I like writing like
All right.
long.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. For some time, I was discombobulated, obviously. Um, as I said earlier, I was somewhat sick from the thing myself, so that also distracted me, obviously, from working. But I found that later on, once I found that all I did was stay at home, then I just started writing even more than I'm used to, and I was thinking that I will complete the first draft of this novel that I've been working on for some time by September, but I might actually finish by next month. So in some ways, the lockdown has accelerated, my pace of writing. Yeah.
Everyone on social media will be very, very jealous of you right now because because I think a lot of people are struggling to write, and it's been really hard actually because people are worried. But I know that you also feel this, and that we are so fortunate to be able to marry our passion and profession, right? We are supposed to write more so that we can make our careers more stable as an academic who teaches
Mhm.
creative writing. So it's really we are really lucky to be able to have this.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
for me though, I don't know. I see it somewhat as uh, auxiliary in some ways to my writing, or in fact, sometimes I see it as almost the same thing. So sometimes I see it as auxiliary, sometimes I see it as the same practice. Because what is great about creative writing is that when we teach it, we're reading, which
Yes.
so one of the process of writing is actually reading. So you are still engaging in writing, even though it's called work. So yeah, I see them as almost the same thing, really.
I feel very good when I teach. I like teaching both undergraduates and graduates, but I
Mhm.
feel that when I teach writers with a high level of commitment, I learn so much more from them. And this is often with the graduate students. With the undergraduate students, they need more, help and attention. But again, a good undergraduate student ends up teaching me so much more. That's really
Mhm.
wonderful, actually. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think we are almost done probably, and I think I'm going to wait till Sanjay comes in to
Okay. He's
conclude
here.
this.
We got
Thank you,
him.
Aruni. Thank you, Chigozie. And absolutely, you have to come to the Jaipur Literature Festival. We were so hoping to get you there maybe in 2021. I mean, inshallah, all goes
Well, yeah,
well.
we'll see.
You're happy to come. At any rate, you've got some immunity now. So that sort of helps in many ways. But thank you both for that brilliant conversation. And you're right, I think people will rush out to buy the book. Amazon started delivering across the world, so it's certainly a place to find out about the Chi and look at how that novel, or both his novels actually, progress, and of course Aruni's own work. Aruni, when do you publish your latest the nonfiction work that you're doing?
I don't know. I'm just doing this to kind of keep myself writing a lot of personal essays. I hope some magazines will approach me to, publish them because people are looking for content. But I'm not thinking of a book, but I'm just happy to be able to write. And I don't end up publishing most of the things I write. I just write because it's just so fun, so much fun to write.
Fantastic. And on that happy note of so much fun to write, thank you all for watching and being such a wonderful audience. We thank our official radio partners, Red FM Bajate Raho. And please do remember to log in on Saturday the 13th and Sunday the 14th of June for another set of exciting sessions from JLF's Brave New World. The Great March, Barkha Dutt in conversation with Pragya Tiwari, as millions of Indian citizens trudge home braving every obstacle with courage and fortitude. Barkha Dutt examines her heartbreaking journey and the societal and structural lapses that set the stage for this tragic march. She's in conversation with Pragya Tiwari, and this will be at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 3 p.m. British Summer Time, and 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's followed by The End of the Ocean, Maya Lunde in conversation with Catherine Morris. Maya Lunde's latest Cli-Fi book, The End of the Ocean, explores the threat of a devastating worldwide drought witnessed through the lives of a father, a daughter, and a woman who will risk her life to save the future. The best-selling Norwegian author speaks to Catherine Morris about the climate crisis and how she mirrors nature and its disruptions in her fiction. This will be at 9 p.m. IST, 4:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Also to remind you that the Dalai Lama will be with us on JLF's Brave New World on Wednesday, 16th of June. And now we present a short extract from the archives of the Jaipur Morning Music Stage featuring Vidushi Saraswati Rajagopalan, a leading Veena player belonging to the Carnatic classical music genre. Hailing from a musical family, she started rendering solo performances from the age of 12. Enjoy the music. Look forward to seeing you on the weekend. Stay safe.
you.